Stephanie Stewart was a 70-year-old woman who loved her job. She was a fire lookout scout, spending her days stationed at the Athabasca Lookout around 15 miles away from the town of Hinton. She played an important role in protecting the beautiful nature around her from wildfires, and she truly loved living alone in the lookout, surrounded by the peaceful forest that she had called home every summer for 13 years. She loved her work, and her job meant everything to her. Everyone around her knew that. On the morning of August 26, 2006, Stephanie failed to report in. Her failure to check in alarmed the head office, and so they decided to conduct a welfare check to ensure that everything was alright. The wildfire service made their way to the station, but to their horror, Stephanie was nowhere to be found. Her pickup truck was still parked outside, but the cabin was eerily empty. It was clear that something terrible had happened. Investigators were called to the scene and they noticed that the stove was on with a pot of water on it that had nearly evaporated. Multiple items, including a watch and a comforter, had also gone missing from the cabin. By far the most terrifying discovery was a few spots of blood on the stairs leading to the cabin. The investigators initially thought that an animal might have attacked Stephanie, but when they failed to find any prints or hair in the surrounding area, they were convinced that she had been kidnapped and slain by an unknown assailant. A massive search was launched and over 2,900 square miles of wilderness were scoured, but nothing was found. As days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, the hope of finding Stephanie was gone. The authorities have never found any trace of her, and to this day, this case is marked as a homicide and remains unsolved. Daniel Robinson was the kind of guy that everyone loved. At 24 years old, he had his whole life ahead of him, and it was truly exciting. He had just graduated from the College of Charleston with high marks, and had landed a job with a major engineering company in Arizona. It was a dream come true for him, but things took a strange turn, and his peers would take notice. He was known as a happy-go-lucky guy, the life of the party who loved to chat with anyone about anything. Lately though, it seemed as if he was keeping to himself a lot more. They began to wonder what was going on with Daniel. They found his apartment door wide open, and he had stopped calling his family even though he used to keep in constant contact with them, calling them every 6 hours of each day. They started to keep a closer eye on him to ensure that his mental state didn't worsen. In June 2021, Daniel was eager to make some extra cash after his move, so he signed up as a shopper for Instacart. Everything seemed to be going well, until a woman named Caitlin would order him groceries using the app. Daniel was the driver to accept her order, and he would arrive at her house with the delivery. Caitlin's friend would answer the door and she would invite Daniel inside. He would sit down and enjoy their intoxicated company for a while, before ultimately deciding that it was time for him to leave. Before leaving, he exchanged numbers with Caitlin and then went home after an enjoyable evening. What started as a simple delivery would soon turn into a nightmare for Caitlin. Daniel would show up uninvited to Caitlin's home multiple times, and this would make her feel extremely uncomfortable. She thought she could handle the situation, but things took a turn for the worse when on June 20th, Daniel expressed his love for her in a text message. She would not immediately respond, but instead craft the perfect response that read,
"Honestly, you showing up at my house unannounced made me extremely uncomfortable. I will not be home today, but I don't see us hanging out anytime soon."
Daniel responded,
"I'm outside your place."
Caitlin would be in shock at how he had completely disregarded what she had said. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. One thing was for sure, she was glad that she wasn't home.
"Please stop doing that. I'm not even home. This is not okay."
Daniel would bluntly ask,
"Do you hate me?"
to which Caitlin replied,
"I don't hate you, but please leave me alone."
Daniel would send one final message to Caitlin that night reading,
"The world can get better, but I'll have to take all the time I can or we can, whatever to name it. I'll either see you again or never see you again."
This exchange had just added to her discomfort and now fear of Daniel, and she had made the decision to cut ties with him forever, determined to never speak to him ever again, and that she did. The blistering sun of the Arizona desert was beating down on Ken Elliott, a co-worker of Daniel's, on the morning of June 23rd. This was the first time Ken and Daniel were working on a project together, and they were tasked with assessing a drill site that was hoping to move forward. Daniel arrived at the site and they exchanged casual conversation about the heat and the day ahead. Without warning, Daniel's demeanour would suddenly shift. Ken noticed immediately that his co-worker suddenly had a distant look in his eyes, and he was peering off into the seemingly endless desert without saying a word. The silence wouldn't last long, as Daniel began to ask Ken bizarre questions, asking him if he wanted to return to Phoenix with him to rest. Ken was getting uneasy now, and he was wondering if Daniel suffered with a medical condition he didn't know about, or if he was under the influence of unknown substances. He was still ready to work with the man though. They did have an important task at hand after all. Daniel headed over to his jeep and waved goodbye to Ken. He started heading down the desert road, leaving Ken behind, alone. Ken assumed that Daniel had just fallen ill, so he had planned to assess the site by himself. He called their employer to inform them of Daniel's departure, and he assessed the site over the next few hours. When he was heading home though, he noticed something. At one point in the road, he can either turn left or right. Obviously Ken planned to head back into town, so he was indicating that way, but he noticed that the tire tracks that belonged to Daniel had gone the opposite way, driving further into the desert. At this moment, Ken realised that Daniel hadn't gone home as he had initially thought, and the search for Daniel Robinson officially began. The Buckeye Police Department deployed every resource they had at their disposal to locate the missing man. For the next month, they would scour over 70 square miles of desert, but their search brought up nothing. On July 19th, a rancher would stumble upon the wreckage of Daniel's Jeep, just a few miles away from his worksite. It had crashed on its side in a ravine, and it had suffered significant damage. The airbags had been deployed, and inside of the vehicle lay Daniel's possessions, including his wallet, keys, and the clothes that he wore the day he went missing. There were no traces of foul play, and there was no blood to point towards Daniel having perished in or around the vehicle. As they continued their investigation, they would find some unsettling facts that raised more questions than answers. Daniel's Jeep had endured multiple accidents in the hours after leaving the worksite. The airbags had inflated, however the ignition was then turned at least 46 times, and then the vehicle continued to drive for another 11 miles. Strangely though, the vehicle was far closer to the worksite than 11 miles, and the area where it was found had already been searched on foot and by air. As the months went on, the case grew colder. The authorities made only one major discovery: 2 sets of human remains. These were looked at, and it was discovered that neither of them belonged to Daniel. But that just added another question into the mix. Who were these people? That question would go unanswered like the rest. Police and private investigators attempted to find any meaningful lead that could point them towards Daniel. However, they would only find dead ends and empty trails. They even began searching amongst the homeless population after some homeless people in the area had reported sightings of Daniel. They wanted to investigate this as it seemed unlikely that you can mistake Daniel for someone else. He was missing his right hand after all. This never came of anything though, but the family continued to pray that their son would return to them. His family rejected the notion that he had willingly disappeared, and they believe that he was rather a victim of foul play. On the other side, some people believe that this was a gradual breakdown that resulted in his demise. The early signs of odd behaviour pointed towards this, and it seemed as if he may have been suffering with an undisclosed mental condition that caused him to wander into the unforgiving desert. The fate of Daniel will likely remain a mystery. Diane Augat was a woman haunted by her own demons. The mother of 3 children and the wife of Frederick Augat, her life would take a dark turn when she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She was prescribed medication to help her condition, but she often refused it, leading to a rapid decline in her behaviour over the years that followed. In 1988, a shocking accusation shook her community. Diane was accused of child abuse, with the case stating that she had sought excessive and unnecessary treatment for her children. Though she escaped legal charges, she lost custody of her children, and her marriage crumbled under the weight of the tension caused by this ordeal, leading to her eventual divorce. As she continued to struggle, Diane turned to drugs and alcohol, neglecting the medication that she had been given in favour of them. With each passing day, Diane sank deeper into the abyss, finding solace in the company of questionable individuals. It became common for her to disappear for days on end, leaving her loved ones extremely worried. Her frequent run-ins with the law for petty crimes only added to the mounting darkness that was seeming to consume her more and more every day. The authorities eventually intervened, and they placed Diane in a mental health facility under the local Mental Health Act. Her time there proved to be temporary though, as eventually she would move in with her sister, Deborah, in Hudson. Deborah was determined to get her sister back on track, but things would change in an instant. On the morning of April 10th, 1998, Deborah had left home to attend a routine doctor's appointment. leaving Diane behind. When Deborah returned later that day, she discovered that her sister was nowhere to be found. Initially, Deborah brushed it off, knowing that Diane had vanished intentionally in the past. But as the hours turned into days, and Diane failed to return, she was gripped by the feeling that something worse may have occurred. Mildred, Diane's mother, made the decision to file a missing persons report. Investigators delved into the case, piecing together a rough timeline of events that they could trace. Diane was believed to have left the house around 11 AM on April 10th, likely hitchhiking as she had no means of transportation. Witnesses claimed to have seen her walking near New York Avenue later that day, describing her as looking intoxicated. She was spotted one last time close to a local bar before she disappeared for good. Days passed as the investigation dragged on, with no new evidence or sightings being reported. Mildred would receive a phone call on April 14th, but she would not be home to answer it. It rang to voicemail, and when she played it back, the recording sent a chill down her spine. There was a plea for help, and it was Diane's voice. It sounded as if Diane had got into a scuffle with someone else before the phone was taken from her by an unknown person. Diane demanded the phone back before the voicemail finally ended. The caller ID showed a name, Starlight. However, despite police following leads to find out the identity of the person behind this, the mysterious caller remains a mystery. That same day, a local resident's girlfriend would stumble upon something terrifying. While on her way to work, she'd spotted what she thought was a prank finger. This stuck with her though, and she told her boyfriend when she returned home that evening. He was intrigued, and so he went to investigate. At the scene, he discovered a real severed human finger. The police were called, and they ran tests to confirm its owner. The results came back, and they stated that it had belonged to Diane. The finger was also located in the exact area where Diane had last been spotted on the day of her disappearance, near New York Avenue. April 18th would continue the horror. Diane's home in Odessa had been looted, but initially it was brushed off as Diane was known to let people have parties there when she wasn't home. This assumption would be shattered though when the manager of a local convenience store that Diane had frequented would discover neatly folded clothes in the outside freezer. She recognized them as Diane's, and she contacted Deborah to confirm. The clothes were indeed Diane's, but who had placed them there, and why? As time passed, the case faded into obscurity, garnering little attention from the public or the media. This all changed though, when 2.5 years later, the Times decided to shine a spotlight on her disappearance, thrusting it back into the minds of readers. The following day, the girlfriend of Diane's brother was shopping at a Circle K store where Deborah worked. She would make her way to the lottery counter when she would spot a plastic bag, crudely marked with the name Diane in black pen. She untied the knot and opened the bag, peering inside. The contents were black eyeliner, perfume, lipstick, and toothpaste. Normal items, but the chilling fact was that they had all belonged to Diane. This begged the question, how did Diane's personal belongings end up in the store? Who placed them there? And how would they be sure that her brother's girlfriend would discover them? Security cameras had picked up nothing, and so the identity of whoever had placed a bag there remained a mystery. The investigation continued, but it became clear to investigators that no major breakthroughs were awaiting them. Diane remained missing, with the last sighting being on April 10th all those years ago. Only one suspect has ever surfaced in connection to her disappearance, a man whose proximity to New York Avenue was his sole link to the case. He was never officially charged though, and he passed away in 2012, leaving any hope of holding him accountable fading. This case has left many unanswered questions such as, who was the Starlight that called Diane's mother? What has happened to Diane after the plea for help went unanswered? And who placed the bag of her possessions within the walls of that store? With the passing of the main suspect and the fact that this occurred so long ago, these answers may be forever out of reach. A big thank you to my incredible Patreon supporters Morrigan, Neo, Alex Rod, K4 Silver, Entreprenaut, Collect Yuki, and Cynic Zally. If you've been enjoying the content, it would mean the world to me if you subscribe to the channel and turn on bell notifications so you never miss an upload. For those who wish to support me further, I invite you to join us over on Patreon for as little as £2.50 a month. By becoming a patron, you can unlock a range of benefits designed for fans of the channel, including an exclusive version of this video with an additional case. Remember though, this is never necessary, and subscribing means just as much. This is simply for people who want a little extra. I appreciate every single one of you, so thank you for watching, and until next time, sleep tight.